So, before we get started, let's do some introductions. Oops, oh, wrong way. Wow. Okay, so why don't we start with Victoria?
Hello, my name is Victoria Banyan, and I lead cooperative housing development for the Northwest Cooperative Development Center. I have been with the Northwest Cooperative Development Center for a little over 4 years. The NWCDC, we have 27 limited equity cooperatives that are manufactured housing communities that we support. We are also the only statewide organization as an eligible organization working to preserve manufactured housing communities when they are listed for sale.
And Greg?
I'm Greg Blunt, and I'm the Executive Director of MHCP, Manufactured Housing Community Preservationists, since 2008. But I was on the board of MHCP prior to that, since they were formed in 1992. And before I became the director of MHCP, I was a multifamily architect in Seattle for 22 years. MHCP was formed following a King County study to try to find out what could be done to preserve manufactured housings, to avoid the manufactured housing communities, to avoid the displacements and people losing their equity, losing their homes when these properties were sold. At that time, there were some high-profile closures in the Seattle area that led to people losing their equity, losing their homes, losing their investment, losing their opportunity to create generational wealth for their estates and their children. And as a result of that study, MHCP was formed. And we currently own 5 communities in King County. They are historically older, what used to be called mobile home parks, and there's 342 households on average, and they're all family communities with an average of over 3 people per household, so like 1,100 people in 5 old historic trailer parks.
Thanks, Greg. And Pavel?
Hi, I'm Pavel Parfilo. I work at Spokane County. I'm the Affordable Housing Program Manager, and trying to get public funding into all of this, trying to leverage as much funding as we can, get into not really innovative because, I mean, manufactured home parks, home communities have been around for a long time, but maybe getting back into it and seeing what new approaches we can take to make it more effective for affordable housing.
Okay, and let's see here. Obviously having trouble with this. Okay, and then to circle back to me, I'm Bridget, and I work at Commerce, and our goal at Commerce is to strengthen communities. You've all been here at Housing Washington. Housing is a big part of what we do at Commerce. So, vital home ownership option. Everybody up on this stage, and I'm presuming all of you who are here, believe that manufactured housing communities are a vital source of home ownership in Washington and in our affordable housing portfolio. In fact, manufactured housing is the most affordable option available for single-family home ownership. And in Washington State, as of July of this year, the Department of Revenue reports about 1,200 communities with almost 60,000 households. Homeownership opportunities are most pronounced for folks who are of low and moderate income in these communities, and they are oftentimes communities of choice. These folks, more oftentimes than not, might choose to rent, but they have an opportunity to own a home and create wealth, build an asset in manufactured housing communities. And there are also folks who tend to want to live in a community of folks who help each other out. A lot of multi-generational families live in these communities. And we're seeing a lot of seniors choose this opportunity for community to age in place. It's a very, very important thing for seniors in these communities. We are seeing right now, and you might have seen this in the news lately, that there are a lot of challenges right now for folks living in these communities. Primarily, we're seeing a lot of real estate market pressures, and that is really, there's the cost of land, speculation, investment desirability. What we're seeing for a lot of folks is tremendous, tremendous base rent increases, which are having a really dire impact on folks. I was at a community meeting in Ellensburg a few weeks ago, and residents are really having to think about, what am I going to pay? Am I going to pay for my prescription medication? Am I going to pay for my rent? There's a lot of conversation about folks having to walk away from the homes that they've put equity in, that they purchased 20, 30 years ago and have put $50,000 to $100,000 worth of work in. So this really is a difficult situation for a lot of folks in these communities. We're also seeing a couple of other challenges. A lot of these communities have aging infrastructure, and a lot of the homes in the communities themselves are quite old. So we need to look at not only infrastructure for the entire community, but also replacement of some of these aging homes in communities. And then one point that I want to make sure as a challenge, I'm going to read it verbatim from my notes, because I worked with the planning folks at Commerce to get the exact language. It's about the Growth Management Act. In some places, lower density communities may be inconsistent with the planning goals of local communities and the Growth Management Act. So a lot of people will say that there are issues with zoning, and I think maybe some of our panelists might have thoughts about that. I did go directly to our growth management folks, and for them, they really wanted me to communicate as a staff at Commerce, and I understand what they're saying is that there is inconsistency with the desire to preserve and even sometimes develop new low-density communities and areas where the local government and the state supports the higher density in urban areas, especially when there are significant public infrastructure investments. So that does seem to be a pretty big challenge. So my first question is for all three panelists. Manufactured housing community residents are a uniquely vulnerable class of renter. They typically own their homes but rent the land. How are current market pressures affecting community residents?
So in my position, I work a lot with owners and sellers of manufactured housing communities. Northwest Cooperative Development Center is alerted when a community is listed for sale. And after that alert, I work with the owners to negotiate to see if there's an opportunity for a cooperative to purchase the manufactured housing community. Given the past 4 years and my experience in that industry, we've seen a big change in the valuation of manufactured housing communities. That actually is a result of COVID. So when COVID happened and the moratoriums happened, residents in multifamily stopped paying their rent. They didn't have to. Investors saw a decline in their ROI and moved all of their money to manufactured housing communities. So in the last half of 2020 and pretty much all of 2021, the valuation of these communities skyrocketed. We were seeing parks being bought like sight unseen in 30 days, and we're still seeing that. There was a community in Central Washington that I was in active negotiation with a couple weeks ago, but the offer that I was competing against was an all-cash offer at asking, closing in 14 days. I can't do that. Why? You're spending millions of dollars and you're not even looking underground at all. But because of that, the valuation and the price of those parks were permanently altered. And so somebody has to end up paying for that permanent altering. And so altering. And so that cost actually really comes down to the residents, and the residents really are footing some of that bill and some of that permanent change.
I'd like to support what Victoria just said. This is new in the past 4 years that the speculators and the commercial industrial real estate investors have seen manufactured housing communities as this opportunity to keep them in manufactured housing, but jack up the prices and create a cash generating, low cost in terms of operations, real estate investment. And prior to that, the biggest risk from a real estate standpoint was more redevelopment because of the large size of the parcels and their location in population centers, often in the first ring suburbs or small towns, places where they're also still vulnerable, not just to speculators buying them and jacking up the rents and inflating the prices, but to big box developers, distribution warehouse developers, people who need a lot of land close in. And so that also keeps the prices high. I don't know if this is the time to mention it, but nonprofit borrowing for affordable housing limits the price that we can pay to something that's supported by an appraisal. And these things are all trading currently well above an appraised value. And whether this is a trend, you said permanently altered the price. I mean, there's no reason to assume it's going to go back to the way it was. When you would buy a manufactured housing community that had tenants or vacancies that had affordability issues. And I think, Pablo, you were talking about...
We didn't prepare for this.
yeah. One of these, anyway, the appraisal. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Appraised value versus assessed value. Yeah.
Right, right.
I think we were going to maybe talk about that when you guys were talking about possible policy solutions.
There you
Okay.
go.
So, Pavel, do you want to, any thoughts on the first question?
Yes. So I'm a bit of a stats guy and numbers guy. So just to put some of what the last two have just mentioned into numbers. One of the big issues right now going on with manufactured housing is, well, it's not even an issue. It's the fact that the occupancy rate is at about 99% as of 2023. If you know anything about multifamily rentals, that's a fairly good percentage. Another thing that's happened recently due to whether it's speculation or just investors lowering their risk profiles for manufactured housing is the cap rates have gone down on these parks. So the market has, instead of pricing these at about a 10% cap rate for smaller parks, now it's sitting at about 7% for small parks. For institutional level parks, it's gone down from 7% to about 5.6%. So these, it may not sound like a lot if you're not familiar with cap rates, but these are quite significant jumps in price. And you know, when investors take over parks, they're trying to raise their cash flows. They're trying to appreciate the property. So in turn, the lot rents go up. So the average lot rent currently for the Pacific region is just about $1,000 or more for regular unrestricted parks. And for 55 plus communities, they're sitting at about $850 a month. So it's quite high, but that's also including California. So that's just an average of that area.
Can I add one thing to the cap
Sure.
rates? Like, to bring it down in terms of what we're seeing. On the west side along I-5, the cap rate actually doesn't matter. We're looking at the pricing per lot. And so along I-5, you can see pricing per lot between $120,000 and $225,000 per lot. In Spokane, you're closer to $80,000, $90,000, maybe $100,000 per lot. And in Central Washington, you're looking at closer to like $50,000 to $90,000 per lot. But that's what you're seeing in your cap rates. The cap rates along I-5 are like 2%, sometimes 3%. And so it's dramatically decreased from what it was 3 years ago.
Just 3 seconds.
Go for it.
This shows that there is a large demand for manufactured housing, the high occupancy rate and skyrocketing prices. So Only one solution, build more.
And I would say too, so the Department of Commerce also, we have the Relocation Assistance and Coordination Program, and that program comes into play when communities are going to permanently close. And something I find very interesting, in the last couple of years, we have one community that we know of that is closing in 2026, no communities closing in 2025, and I believe 4 communities maybe in 2024. And usually the average is about 4 to 5 communities closed per year, impacting about 120 households. So I'm just now kind of putting 2 and 2 together, that if a community owner can jack up the rent and still make quite a profit, they don't have the need right now to close their communities for redevelopment purposes. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. Okay. Market-driven. Well, this kind of leads us into the next topic here. So the topic of this session is manufactured housing community preservation and the new HUD initiative. So Commerce submitted a consolidated application on behalf of Washington State for the HUD price grant, and PRICE means Preservation and Reinvestment Initiative for Community Enhancement. That is a mouthful, so we just stick with PRICE. There were 2 categories, the PRICE main category and the PRICE replacement pilot. Commerce applied for both pots of funding, and if we successfully receive all that we requested, which was $85 million, then we hope to positively impact the lives of over 1,300 households in 23 separate manufactured housing communities in Washington. And we've committed as an agency, part of our strategic plan or goal, if we receive any sort of funding from HUD, we will definitely seek match from the state. And then on another funding note, before I ask a question to our panelists, Commerce has submitted a request to OFM, the Office of Financial Management, for the 2025 legislative session of $1.2 billion to support affordable housing efforts. A portion of that will go towards preserving homeownership in manufactured housing communities, so that's pretty exciting. Again, that's just a request. It needs to be approved by OFM and then written in the governor's budget. So fingers crossed. We're all really hoping that we can watch that through session and we'll have a positive outcome in June. So I do have a question for my panelists. Question 2. Each of your organizations included projects in the application. If awarded, can you briefly describe how your projects will affect current and future manufactured housing community residents? Victoria?
Yeah, so in the communities that we support, the 27 cooperatively owned communities that we support, as you can imagine, the infrastructure in them is aging. Most manufactured housing communities were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And if you know anything about infrastructure, they're reaching their remaining useful life, no matter if it was built with concrete or galvanized steel or whatever it is. So the cost of replacement of those systems becomes a cost of replacement for the cooperative. And the cooperative pays their operating costs by the household members that are in that community. So if there's an unexpected infrastructure repair, the residents actually raise their lot fee, their monthly lot fee, to be able to cover for that expense. So price would help eliminate that potential additional burden that the cooperatives are going to have to face and address. And so it would ensure financial stability in financial success for the cooperative themselves, and it would reduce the individual impact on each household within the cooperative. Additionally, price would allow for the acquisition of additional manufactured housing communities. Because of the astronomical purchase price that we just talked about, we are having to subsidize the acquisition cost at about a 25% rate. So access to price funding or additional subsidy funding would allow for the acquisition of additional manufactured housing communities. Without subsidy, the cooperative and really anybody is not able to purchase the manufactured housing communities. So that price is very critical for us to be able to keep doing this work and support additional cooperatives.
Greg?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Similarly, on our 5 communities, they're all my age, in their early 60s.
I was going to say 27 years
Yeah.
old.
And
Wow.
as Victoria said, and as you can imagine, the underground infrastructure is far beyond its useful life. Although some of the communities were rehabbed at the time of acquisition, but that now is over 30 years old. And we're talking about systems. When we acquired our largest community, we couldn't afford to update the electrical system. But now this price opportunity may give us the opportunity to go in there in a 107 household community and put in a new electrical system. We have a water system in mind, and each of our 5 communities would be the beneficiary of some of this infrastructure. We applied for 2 projects. One was this infrastructure, and then from an operational standpoint, we would replace the individual residents' water meters with remote reading new electronic water meters, so our staff doesn't have to get down on their hands and knees and clean off the little window and read the water meter every month. So we have an infrastructure project in, and we are also developing a new 30-space community in Skyway, south of Seattle. And we have, if you remember up on it said enhancement was one of their words, and we would like to enhance that project by bringing in price funds to make some of the individual lot improvements a part of the infrastructure in order to exclude them from the purchase price of the house, and therefore make the houses themselves more affordable to the home buyers. And so those would be site features on the ground, but on the individual lots, a part of the infrastructure of the community, not something the home buyer has to buy. Those are our 2 projects.
Thanks, Greg. What about you, Pavel?
Well, Spokane County's project is essentially dealing with creating a new, hopefully around net 40, net 60 units, but also helping assist some of the tenants near the, I don't know if all of you are familiar with it, but the accident potential zone by Fairchild Air Force Base in the West Plains of Spokane County. Currently, there are about 5 parks there that a lot of them are unfortunately dilapidated, potentially irreparable since they're pre-1978. So basically, this would be assistance to some of those manufactured home tenants to be able to live in better and improved housing that is outside of that accident potential zone. So that's our project.
And I can't remember, Pavel, but was there a conversation about your project also collaborating with Commerce in regards to relocation assistance and coordination? Okay.
That is correct. Yeah. So we would be able to tap into the relocation funding and be able to essentially leverage several funding sources into being down payment assistance for those tenants. And we're working with a handful of nonprofits that would be able to kind of bring it through a whole process of homeowner education, financial education, getting them ready for those that haven't owned yet to be able to own and effectively own and upkeep. So it's one of those forms of housing where potentially the tenants don't really understand how to be a homeowner yet. They maybe never experienced it. Their parents may have not been homeowners. So it's really crucial to have them understand what a homeowner really is, make sure that it's affordable, and for them to upkeep their property and preserve their wealth.
I was going to say, too, that that's a really good example, Pavel, of, the goal that we're talking about here in this session is the preservation of manufactured housing community as affordable housing, as affordable homeownership opportunities. But there are going to be times when communities cannot be preserved. And so your example, Pavel, of, if you guys are able, if you get the price funding, or let's imagine other funding as well, and you're able to relocate these folks out of the accident potential zone, then we've got the collaborative efforts of, that funding and the relocation assistance and coordination program from Commerce. And then you also mentioned down payment assistance funding. So it's like pulling from all of these various sources to help folks get out of this crisis moment in their lives and transition into, either apartments outside the accident potential zone or home ownership. The key is getting those folks out of that area and rehoused successfully. That's very cool. And just really briefly, too, you guys are talking about funding, and I wanted to let folks out here know that Commerce received a proviso from the 2024 legislative session to look at innovative funding structures for the purchase and preservation of manufactured housing communities. We're doing that work right now. We are using the services of Commerce's research services folks. They are very bright-minded people. I believe they've interviewed maybe all of you. If not all of you, then we should make sure that they interview you. Looking at, what are different ways that we can look at structuring funds to purchase and preserve these communities. So the report is due to the legislature at the end of June in 2025. And then we're hoping from that to then take a look at, okay, now we have these additional hopeful funding, additional sources of funding. Now we need to look at maybe a census of all the manufactured housing communities in Washington, and then also take a look at a feasibility study for, how do we know which communities we're going to start working on, because there are a lot of them. So let's see, we're going to skip to, I'm going to move to the last question. Okay, so question 3. So we've been talking about challenges and opportunities for residents currently living in manufactured housing communities. We're going to spend the last 10 minutes or so talking about new development. So my final question for you 3, what challenges have you encountered in the development of new communities, and do you have any policy recommendations for overcoming these challenges? Victoria.
So I have been trying to develop a new manufactured housing community for the past 2 years. I was seconds away from signing that purchase and sale agreement on the land and had all the financing structure ready to go. And then realized that at the end of it, the households that are living in that community, we were going to build a ground up manufactured housing community, cooperatively owned from the very beginning. But at the end of the day, the households living in that community would have to access a chattel loan because the home is personal property. A manufactured home is treated just like your RV, your boat, or your car. It is licensed and titled the same way, and you get the same type of loan for a manufactured home. That loan is often very predatory. It comes at a high interest rate and often requires a 20% down payment of cash to be able to access and purchase a brand new home. Well, that didn't feel like that was going to be the type of loan that we wanted our households to have to access. So I am currently working with lawmakers to create legislative change to change the title of manufactured homes in cooperatively owned communities. Parentheses, that's it. There are no other, just them, to allow the residents to change the home to real property. When that resident is able to change the home to real property, they will be able to access a Title I or Title II loan that is GSE backed, just like your traditional mortgage. They will be able to access down payment assistance. Right now, they do not have access to any sort of down payment assistance. And with that change, then we can proceed with the building of manufactured housing communities and really ensure that the residents are able to get all of the subsidy funding that they really should be able to access, and live in a community where they really want to live. So that is one of the biggest challenges. It's actually not dirt, it's not land, there's zoning challenges everywhere, but really we want to be able to finance the whole thing from start to finish using the best possible resources.
Hear, hear. We are developing a new community in Skyway South Seattle. The reason we're able to do it is because the property itself was gifted free of charge to the King County Housing Authority. This particular parcel sits between and abutting on 3 sides two manufactured housing communities that MHCP already owns and operates as affordable housing. This property came at no cost. To complete the development, MHCP is giving some of the adjacent property that we own to the development site. Had that not happened, there's no way we could proceed with this. The land is just simply too expensive. Fortunately for us, this transpired because the previous owner, who was a real estate developer, was unable to develop that property, not for lack of trying, but because of some downstream issues that had to do with the development he was proposing, which created too much surface water runoff. And we have designed our low impact, low density development such that there's no net increase in runoff by having massive on-site stormwater detention and that kind of thing. That was a fundamental problem. The other was touched on earlier, was that the zoning, R24, 24 units per acre, not only has the maximum of 24 units per acre, but in King County had a minimum. This was an urban site. They wanted you to be able to produce at least 56 units minimum on this 74 acre or 74 unit parcel. And that fact has created all kinds of delays and challenges, but never say never. And once again, we couldn't spend the time and the effort to confront these challenges if the land didn't just land in the housing authority's lap. I don't think I have time to talk about some other challenges.
Well, we can possibly come back to that. Yeah. What about you, Pavel?
I'll keep mine fairly simple. I think biggest challenge is probably stigma and the stigma surrounding manufactured housing. It'll go into the lending world, it'll go into the local government, legislative world. Once that stigma is gone, once risk profiles are normalized, because I mean, the manufactured homes now will hold up way better than manufactured homes that were built in 1960. That's flat out how it is. But for some reason, risk profiles are still held just as high for brand new manufactured homes as they are for a 1965 mobile home. So I think once the stigma goes away, I think we will start seeing a waterfall effect through every single aspect surrounding manufactured housing.
I think, thanks, Pavel. Did you want to follow up with something, Greg? Because we have a little bit more time if you want to.
It was literally stigma.
Okay.
And
I beat you to it.
yeah, well, but how pervasive it is. And the unfortunate thing about Trailer Park Boys is that it has the ring of truth. I mean, most trailer parks aren't like that. But they are affordable to low and moderate income families. There are issues that impact society at large in the locations where they're owned. But these are homeowners who've got equity and aspirations, and they perform a very sincere role in cities where some of the bureaucratic They just haven't got over the stigma yet. And we're not talking about building trailer parks. We're talking about preserving communities.
Yeah, I think just some facts that manufactured homes don't hold their value. Well, they don't hold their value in investor-owned communities. Manufactured homes, and Harvard just did a study on this, and it's at the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. But manufactured homes that are in preserved communities, either owned by a nonprofit, housing authority, or cooperative, actually maintain their value at the same rate that site-built homes do. So they do hold their value. So like, Harvard can tell you no, right? I think there's other ways that we talk about manufactured housing communities. When I'm talking to cities and counties, I talk about them as a subdivision, because that's really what they are. They're a subdivision within this community, within the larger city where they are housed. They are a group of people that have their own ecosystem and work well within each other. As Bridget said, it's often by choice that residents are living in manufactured housing communities. So when we start to shift from trailer park to it's a subdivision of factory-built housing, that's a whole different conversation. And I think that, yeah, there's a lot of stigma around it. City planners, cities intentionally built walls around manufactured housing communities. We need to take those walls down.
So thank you, Victoria. Let's move to audience questions. And I think I have a fancy slide that actually says audience questions. Oh, no, I hate this thing. Sorry. Oh, nope, audience Q&A. Now we can officially do it. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to go back and forth between questions that people might have asked on the app and questions from the audience directly. Do we have any questions from the app?
No, we don't.
No, we don't. Okay, that's okay. So how about you come up? People can come up here and use the mic.
Hi, I'm Grace Kim, and I am an architect, and I'm curious to know, so I was thinking about this as you were talking, the communities are communities, and I think the stigma part is that because they're, and Greg, you said it, trailer parks, that the general public, the planners, the city officials don't think of them as communities, and I think if there's a way to rebrand it, because not that I have a huge amount of experience, but what I've seen and understood from the mobile home parks is that they are communities, and if you can almost rebrand them, like I'm big into co-housing, but if you could rebrand them into something like that, because those communities have been in maybe sometimes less desirable areas, and they have experienced decades of transition, and now all of a sudden a new light rail station or a new development has occurred there, and now the property is increasing in value. So the displacement risk is as similar as a BIPOC community that has been there historically.
It is incredibly as similar as a BIPOC community. There is a community here, actually south of Spokane in Cheney, that was potentially at risk of redevelopment. And I talked with those residents, and I went to the city council, and one of the residents actually said, like, if you close my community, I'm going to die. And that seems extremely dramatic, but she was dead serious, because she doesn't know how she's going to get her medicine, because her neighbor gets her medicine for her. Where's she going to go? Who's going to get her medicine for her? She doesn't know how she's going to get to her doctor's appointments because the other neighbor takes her to her doctor's appointments. These are insular communities that have created their own ecosystem. So to your point, the risk of displacement and the effects of displacement are another trauma on a group of people that have already experienced potentially tremendous trauma. I think one of the other things that is real is that we know what manufactured housing communities look like. We drive by them too. We see the blue tarp, we see the unpermitted addition, and we see the need for social support within the communities. And we get that. But if your home is personal property, you can't take on another mortgage to fix the roof. You don't have that kind of funding or asset. You can't do that. If your community has volatile lot rent and you don't know if it's going to go up $200 next year, you can't afford to actually do the addition to the home and permit it and keep it correct, right? So if we go in and we preserve these communities, if we have nonprofits supporting these communities, stabilizing the expenses of each household, working to pass legislation so that they can get a second mortgage on their home to replace the roof correctly, we reduce the need of social services. We reduce that stigma. We change the entire community. And now they do look and feel just like the subdivision that they truly are. Yeah.
We've got one online if you want to do one.
Let's do the one online first.
To what extent is there a trade-off between density and preservation of manufactured housing? And then to what extent will some of these communities ever redevelop as cooperatively owned multifamily housing or middle housing rather than single-family housing?
That would be really fun. So what extent can we reduce, if I have a preserved manufactured housing community that is cooperatively owned, can we redevelop it into multifamily? Can we redevelop it into site built? I mean, yes, we can. I think that we would have to look at a pro forma to determine, like, what does that look like? I don't think that that's off the table. Absolutely, I think that's a conversation. I think that there are actually communities that are currently cooperatively owned that would be very interested in redevelopment, but that would have to be done very carefully and with a more subsidy. What was the other part of that?
I think you basically
Okay.
answered all of it.
Great.
Greg, it looked like you wanted to say something.
Preservation is the key. These people are already there. That density is what it was. And as long as there's vacant lots and environmentally damaged properties and other development opportunities, I see no reason to initiate a redevelopment of especially a preserved, but one of these communities that already exists. There's just other opportunities and repurposing existing structures and there's nothing wrong with density. And if it's in a transit served area, that's definitely a conversation to be had. But there are sites that are much more likely and should be redeveloped other than existing owner-occupied manufactured housing communities, in my opinion.
Do you have a thought on that, Pavel?
I'll echo all that.
Okay. I will say that if there are any questions that you folks have that you think would be better answered by somebody who is well-versed in the Growth Management Act, on I think the last slide, the thank you slide, you can contact me, Bridget, at Commerce, and I can get you directly to the appropriate person within the growth management folks who specifically work on housing issues. I think you had a question?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lenny Orlov. I'm with City of Seattle, Office of Housing. I actually work with rental housing mostly. That's my role. So we have a homeownership team. I'm not sure if they're actually if manufactured homes are part of that. So I'm going to find out. My question is a little more personal. My mom owns a manufactured home in Huntington Beach, California. And she, knowing that I work in housing, she called me recently and she said, our subdivision got purchased by a new owner and our rent literally doubled. And she was like, what recourse do I have? And I'm like, I don't know. What recourse do homeowners have in that?
None. There is no recourse. The buyer can raise lot rent to whatever they choose. Really, at the time of sale, they can raise lot rent to whatever they choose. I'm seeing, in the first 12 months of opportunity to compete legislation, which was July 2023 through June 2024, there were 59 communities that were listed for sale. Out of those 59 communities, I would say at least half of them saw a lot rent increase before the community was listed for sale. When we increase the lot rent before the community is listed for sale, the valuation of the park increases. So that was an intentional move on the seller. They increased the lot rent by $200, like flat out $200. Marketing for manufactured housing communities right now is including the current performa and a projected performa. And the projected performa has another increase of $200 for the lot rent for those residents. So there is none. Especially in Washington, when we don't have rent stabilization, they can do whatever they want. They just have to wait the 90 days.
Prior to the sale, creating publicity and getting some electeds on your side, but that's all prior to the sale. And back in the aughts, the Wonderland Estates in Renton, and it was one of the best examples where a senior community, the residents got organized. There was a guy in the community who knew all about getting people organized to go to council meetings, both City of Renton and King County Council. One of our communities, clear back in 1996, had a closure emergency because of failing septic next to a salmon-bearing stream. And so it had to be shut down or repaired, and those residents said, you can't take away our opportunity. We own these homes, and that was a big community, 198 spaces. And ultimately, then King County Executive Ron Sims got involved and made it happen. But that's prior to the sale, prior to the imminent closure or the jacked rents.
And I guess we have one on the app. When a manufactured, and it's pretty much the same thing, when a manufactured home community is sold to an investor and costs rise, what protections are available for the individuals being affected? But here's the next thing, are there any policy recommendations you have in relation to this?
Rent stabilization. But I mean, there really isn't any protections. There's nothing. The same is true for a multifamily, right? If a multifamily changes ownership, the same thing can happen in a multifamily community. We're just seeing it happen very frequently in manufactured housing communities right now because they are trading more often than multifamily trades. So the only protections that you're really talking about, you could create some sort of policy that when a property changes ownership, that the rent stays the same for 12 months or whatever. Sure, you could create that, but that's also the same thing as rent stabilization. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm Timothy Dalton. I'm Clallam County, and one of the areas that we're seeing is that this is workforce housing. You know, a lot of this, while we're talking, you know, HUD's coming down at 80% of AMI. This is 80 to 120% of AMI. And that's this is one of the few areas, like I say in Clallam County, it's one of the few areas, manufactured is one of the few areas the workforce can afford to buy. That you know what, that you can come in, you can do this at an affordable, go to Wolf Industries or somebody along that lines if you buy one. I want to know, have you been, maybe Victoria, have you seen, I heard Snohomish County was working on a land trust model to go in there, and with a land trust model that, you know what, if you buy it and you create an HOA, rather than leasing out the lots, you put them, this is kind of what we're looking at for Clallam County, is that if we put this on there, then all of a sudden it becomes real property and not personal property. Because like say, if you're going for a VA loan on something like this, you can't get it because the rates are fluctuating. But if you're in a land trust, that they know that it's 40 years, like DNR was talking some of their projects yesterday, a 99-year lease, that you know what, the lender knows that, okay, this is going to be here for this long a time, and that, it provides stabilization for lenders looking at this. And I'm kind of looking, does that sound like a viable option to what?
Yeah, so you're talking about like at least 3 different things, but yes. So there's a lot of things that to unpack there. The VA loan, right, that has to be real property. We have to convert the manufactured home into real property at a certain point. We partner with a community land trust to preserve the community. Yes, absolutely. I have a model. We can totally do that and look at that. I think the idea of parceling, taking the one parcel of a manufactured housing community and short platting it and turning it into individual property and individual lots and making it real property and selling it fee simple has its challenges with existing communities. Existing communities have a lot of shared utilities that make that pretty hard. So that's where a community land trust or cooperative ownership of an existing community is great. New communities, yeah, we can do fee simple, individual parcel, new communities, but the whole model of nonprofit ownership, co-housing, we're looking at shared equity models because to your point, manufactured housing serves between 60 to 120% AMI. 60 to 120% AMI right now in today's economy are best placed in home ownership options through a shared equity model. And so looking at the community land trust, looking at the cooperative model is probably the best opportunity for rapid growth of manufactured housing.
Okay.
It's just that the funding that allows the acquisition of these properties for preservation includes covenants that keep them in affordable use for 40 or 50 years. And they are preserved communities, and so it's the lenders that don't get it. It's the lenders that think that this is something other than a house, on land, because it's there, and these guys are going out feet first. They bought the place on purpose, and they're happy to be there. They ought to be able to take out a mortgage.
Well, and a lot of people, like say, when they bought the place, that they weren't worried. A lot of people, local people own the lots or own the parks.
Yeah.
And that's who they bought from. And they knew who owned it and that sort of thing. Now you have cooperatives and everything else that are buying it and going in there, and they're not worried about the tenants anymore. It's all about what's the cap rate, what is our ROI on these investments that are kind of what we're looking at, and that's it. And they're knowing, like say, with multifamily, if you raise the rent, then I'm gonna look for another apartment complex to live in. When you're living in a manufactured home park, mobile home park, you don't have that option to pick up and move somewhere because like say, as soon as you move it twice, it's really done with any kind of resale value on it. But okay, I don't know. Okay.
We have about 5 minutes. Before I get to you, let me ask Pavel, is there anybody else on the app?
Gotta do quick. Nope.
Nope, okay.
My question was sort of around, I did a capstone project back in 2020, working with the Northwest Co-op Development Center, who works with resident-owned communities, and they had me research opportunity to purchase and right of first refusal. They're trying to get a bill through to get that sort of legislation through, and I've kind of lost track of that project, and I just wanted to know if you had any updates of that sort of.
Yeah, we passed it. I am
Oh.
Northwest Cooperative Development Center.
Oh.
In 2023, legislation passed creating opportunity to compete for eligible organizations and residents of manufactured housing communities. Eligible organizations is defined as a nonprofit or a community development center, a housing authority, or a tribal organization that is interested in acquisition of manufactured housing communities. We sit there, and tenants themselves can also organize and become and compete for purchase of the park themselves. As you can imagine, most tenants in manufactured housing communities have never purchased a manufactured housing community before. So that's where I come in as a statewide organization working on. The end buyer is the cooperative and is the residents themselves. So initially I'm working to negotiate with the owner or the seller of the property to put it under contract. And once we put it under contract, then we go and we work with those residents. We support them in forming a limited equity cooperative, and we secure the financing for them to purchase their manufactured housing community. Since the bill went into effect in July of 2023, we have been able to purchase 2 manufactured housing communities, and then we have 3 more currently under contract for cooperative acquisition. And I have many offers out right now. I wish that they would get back to me.
And I wanted to say, too, that when Victoria was defining eligible organizations, we actually have 3 examples up here. So we've got Victoria is a nonprofit that helps residents organize and purchase a resident-owned community. And then we've got Greg, who is a nonprofit housing provider. I should know this definition. And then we've got Pavel, who is local government, and part of what Commerce does, and I've got Randy, my colleague here, sitting in the front. So we receive these notices of opportunity to compete to purchase from the community owners, and then we distribute them to folks who have applied as eligible organizations who want to receive these announcements, and then they have 70 days to determine whether or not they would like to essentially throw their hat in the ring to purchase the community and preserve it. I think I'm going to move. All right, here we go. Resources. So we are wrapping up here. We've got some resources. You can find this online. You can actually click on the links and it'll take you to these wonderful things. There's information about Victoria's group, Rock Northwest, about Greg's group, Manufactured Housing Community Preservationists. And then Victoria, you mentioned the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard. There's a great study on their website, and then also Pavel pointed us to this multifamily affordable housing market commentary that has a lot of great information. And then lastly, Commerce, if you go to our web page, you can see there's a map that shows all of the approved notices of opportunity to compete to purchase. And that is it. Thank you. So travel safe and reach out to any of us if you have any questions. If we don't know the answers, we'll guide you to the right people. And I want to say thanks to Ty and to the other guy in the back with the camera. Thanks, guys.